Hey, everybody. We're going to keep going. It's honestly quite difficult to follow that, to follow everything that has already happened today. And in a way, I feel like we could have just left it at, the performances, because as we've already identified, this is it's time for us to listen to our young people who have a lot to say and have a lot for us to learn from. So, but we're here to do more talking.
Yeah. I think, all right. Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, it's so easy for most of us who came up in this very, very systematized art form to think about things in the way that we were taught that we should, and implement things in the way that we should. And I think there's just so much that we can learn from the younger generations, inspirations that I've drawn from for my own career when it comes to taking the proverbial bull by the horns in your own way, and really making a different way. If we want different outcomes, we have to have different means. And I think the more seriously we take that concept, that abstract idea, the closer we can get to actually having the measurable change that we're working toward.
Definitely. So just quickly, you probably already know who I am, but I'm the Vanessa Rose, the Executive Director of American Composers Forum. I'm very pleased to be joined by...
Yeah, my name is Garrett McQueen. I'm an ACF board member, and I chair the Equity Committee on the board of the American Composers Forum. It's an honor for me to be here.
And I have the power of the slides here. So we want, this is actually the second year that we're doing this, this report card. You can watch last year's online. And we do this for a few reasons. One is we have, from this 2019 convening that you've heard about a little bit, and some of whom were involved in that, it really helped to initiate our own examination, which continues, of our organization and how we were indeed creating a racially equitable space and advocating on behalf of the artists that we support in that way. And that really led into a full year of conversation and discussion with our artists, with our board, with our community members, and we published a commitment to racial equity with several specific goals and action steps. It is not a static document. It's something that guides our work every single day. And we also want to acknowledge that there's learning that happens ongoing as we pursue those goals, not only for our own purposes to help inform the work we do and do better, but also we hope is helpful to other organizations, leaders, people in this work that are doing their own efforts that we really learn together, as has already been discussed today.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that PaviElle ended with speaking of liberation, because that's actually a word that was on my spirit in preparing for today's report card presentation. A couple of my titles are listed there. I am involved with several other organizations, including the Black Opera Alliance, the Lakes Area Music Festival here in Minnesota, the International Society for Black Musicians, many others. But that center pin for me is liberation, and how we can inspire that in every corner of the world, as we're all uniquely positioned to do. So here with the American Composers Forum, there are specific things that we can impact toward that broader liberation. And for me, the fuel in that vehicle is equity. I really believe that it has to drive everything that we do. We have to look at everything that we consider when we're building programs, when we're reaching out to constituents for funding or other resources. It has to come through the equity lens. And that's really what has allowed me to remain as active and as dedicated to the American Composers Forum as I am, being able to find an organization that shares that opinion first and foremost, and that vision with me of equity-driven work and equity-based work. Not equity as an addition to something, but equity really as the centerpiece of everything we do as an organization.
And we're so grateful. So thank you, Garrett. So let's move into some specifics. And again, first we need to...
Before we move forward, I would like to honor the Anishinaabe and Dakota peoples who exist not only ancestrally, but today. I would like to offer some special thanks and honor to the Wapakudi Sioux, who are a part of that broader Dakota nation. They're a part of the Eastern Dakota. Dakota. We've gotten really used to giving land acknowledgements at the beginnings of presentations, but in that spirit of equity, we always have to think about how we can move even further. So as we make land acknowledgements, we have to make those land acknowledgements keeping in mind who we are and whose land it really is, if we're going to allege and honor this land as being fostered and maintained for eons by these people. What does that mean for an organization who lives in a building that looks like a castle in downtown St. Paul? You know, what does that mean when it comes to who we engage within our communities and the ways in which we do that? So as we move forward, giving land acknowledgements and honoring Indigenous people, I hope each and every one of you will think about, you know, what can be done on that next level beyond just acknowledging, but actually acting and inspiring thoughts of liberation for Indigenous people, what repatriation looks like, and what that looks like in context of our work. So there are a number of resources listed here, and again, in the spirit of equity and in an effort to not only acknowledge but offer some work, I encourage everyone, if you're able to take a look at this later on, to consider these some really important starting places when it comes to engaging the conversation of Indigenous people and the way that we can honor, again, not only them ancestrally, but as they exist here and now today.
Thank you. I mentioned this statement that we've published. It is on our website. You can read the full commitment. And again, it is continually being refreshed and revisited. It is a living document that we continue to learn and apply our learning to. But this is some of the major components we just wanted to bring forward and center again for this conversation. I think something that's really important to point out is that we have stated that our goal is to achieve a majority BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, at the organization across all aspects of the organization, and that to us majority means 60% or more, by 2025, which is our 50th anniversary of the incorporation of ACF.
Yep, I think we can. So as a part of that work, of course, we have to really center and build upon our key philosophies. Douglas, who is a member of the Equity Committee and the ACF board, is quoted here. We're engaging in an intervention. I think it's really easy for us to think about systems change abstractly, but at the end of the day, systems are built for and by individuals, by people. So our work, you know, in this spirit from the quote there, is to really interrogate those systems on the individual level, on the level where we're actually engaging dialogue with individuals, so that we can actually inspire the systems change that stakeholders, that those individuals can inspire. We approach our work with a recognition of existing systems and affecting the change needed, while also designing an alternative model. Building our own table is absolutely key, and we need more and more of that happening at the community level to give more of us a glimpse of what that liberation looks like. And, not but and, we also have to continue to work toward not perpetuating harm where it exists in existing infrastructures. So again, while a lot of our work is built on engaging artists and supporting artists on the individual level, it's also up to us to make sure that we're interrogating what exists, because if there are harmful systems that exist, there's harm that can be done. So that's a key part of our work. We honor people's self-described identities, including how they identify as an artist and how they identify their music. This is not to say people identify themselves or their art as a thing or as a sound or as an aesthetic, but rather it's what and who they are innately. And we take that truth from them in describing music and describing artists, so that we're not creating containers to, you know, fit individuals in, but rather really allowing them to express themselves musically and artistically just as they are. It also helps us quantify a lot of this work through our data-driven work that we'll spend a little bit of time talking about a little later. We use the term anti-racist to best illustrate our active commitment to learning, listening, and engaging in behavior and actions that eliminate racism. this term anti-racism has come under a lot of interrogation itself. And as an equity committee, we have put a lot of intention around maintaining our proximity and our dedication to this idea of anti-racism. Anti-racism isn't a feeling. Anti-racism isn't even a state of being. It's action. And we're working really hard to live up to what that term really means through a critical look at our program so that our actions can really match what we aspire under that idea. And then finally, our hope is to make the circle bigger for more people to belong to our community. It's not an either or, but a yes and. Inclusion, you know, we often talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, inclusion requires equity because a person can be fully included and fully marginalized. A person can be fully included and fully traumatized. So for us, this means analyzing and interrogating traditions that come with the idea of music generally, certain when it comes to music in the Western tradition, and transforming spaces so that not a single person has to shift themselves or shift who they are or shift their artistry to engage us as an organization, but rather we're just trying to create the ecosystem first within so that artists can come fully as they are, and then hoping that that can inspire change throughout our broader community and ultimately the entire ecosystem of music and sound creation.
Thank you, Garrett. So we want to just go through, I'm not going to read all the text. You can see this on our website later on or watch this video. But we wanted to mention just a few highlights for efforts to just reinforce the ideas that we're saying. I think that's often the critical next step. You know, we're moving beyond statements and words, going to action and reinforcing the action and showing you what we see the outcomes also being so that we continue to make progress. One of the big things we've done is to discontinue our membership program. We used to be a fee-based model, asking artists to pay a monthly or annual fee to have access to all sorts of different services and resources. That is no longer. You can access anything, anybody at any time. I think also notable is that so many people have opted to become donors instead. So 70% of the people, this is thousands of people, well, nearly 2,000 people who were members previously, 70% are now donors. Something we're going to talk about a little bit more too is, I think, also a really big change, which is the Innova Recordings business model. This is actually the 40th anniversary of our record label that's been part of ACF that whole time, and we'll come back to that a little bit. I think the main thing to bring up at this juncture is just how we're thinking about who's making decisions, and again, setting up the stage, as it were, for how those decisions are made so that it is a more equitable outcome. And one of the components actually of that we'll talk a bit more too about is how we select panelists. We have a number of funding programs, the Innova recordings as well, and it is a very intentional process in terms of how we select who makes those decisions, the different opinions, backgrounds, and conversations that we help to really cultivate.
And again, as I was saying earlier, you know, systems are made up of people. So when it comes to calls for recordings or different programs that require panelists, we fully understand the systems that we can create or can't create by not being absolutely intentional about every aspect of those programs. So, you know, the fact that panelists are selected through an interview process is something that I really appreciate from ACF, and something that I think should be highlighted. I'll also highlight here a little bit of the third bullet point, initiated funding support to work with underrepresented genders. This is a conversation that's continuing to evolve, and as we look at our board makeup, for example, you know, we have a lot of work to do to make sure that our perspectives and our conversations are inclusive of those from underrepresented genders. This isn't something that just happens because it naturally happens. This sort of funding and this sort of support is really birthed through dialogue, through pushing against certain systems, and really being centered again on our equity-driven processes as they relate to all of the work that we do here at ACF. So I just wanted to, you know, shine a light on those 2 points specifically.
Thanks, Garrett. And one thing I'll just mention too, with, before we move forward, is it's listed here, but I think something that we also offer that is an important service and advocacy for artists is that we not only give information sessions and offer one-on-one time as you're preparing your application, and we always follow up if somebody, a link isn't working, something isn't working in the application. We also offer feedback, and we've had a number of artists who have opted in to schedule some time with us to have a conversation to learn more about the what the panelists shared. We keep it anonymous, but whatever can be productive for them as they pursue future applications and opportunities.
So we have this beautiful array and representation of diversity as it applies to some of our work. I wonder, Vanessa, if you can speak to how this happened.
Great. And I do want to shout out Chris Campbell and Tim Eigel, who are our Innova recordings team, who have been really doing the lion's share of this work. So, Innova previously existed. It actually was initiated years ago to support the McKnight Fellows here in Minnesota, and then became a national record label. It has always been committed to giving artists 100% performance rights and the revenue from sales. In addition, we wanted to look at how we were making decisions about who was on the label. Again, thinking about the panel process, we did not have a panel process before. It was a submission and then the staff would decide. We wanted to offer transparency. We wanted to be intentional about who was making the decisions. And we wanted to expand the ways in which one could apply to be on the label. So rather than maybe having a whole album already recorded and just looking for a label, you might just have an idea or a single track or just a digital track. Or maybe, maybe you do want to do a CD still, or maybe you want to do vinyl. And we have artists who are really at different stages in the recording process. And importantly, we really think about the collaborative process. So this isn't just about like how are we going to get, how we're going to put it on the album label. It's also what is the story, what is the visibility, who are the networks that we should get in front of, who are the musical supervisors that this could get to that could get more visibility, and I don't know, licensing, which are happening all the time. And we also offer the opportunity to negotiate that licensing for the artist. So another reason we have this depicted here in this way is that we're thinking about it as a cohort as well. So the national call here in the gray, that was our first national call. We did a pilot of this business model last year in the Bay Area, and then this last fall we did a national call, and then we did a second national call this last spring. So these are our people, in addition to other people on the Innova label, I should say. But through this particular process, these are the artists that have been selected this past year.
And of course, it's not just about diversity as far as identity. Through the images you see here is a diversity of perspective, a diversity of musical output, a diversity of musical everything. And that's really important as we, again, through that equity lens, work towards shifting the narrative and the idea of what people think that we're able to do and who we're able to support as an organization. So in addition to these calls, changing the lives, at least to a degree, of a number of artists from diverse backgrounds, we're also putting our money where our mouth is and making sure that all music is welcome, all perspectives belong in our space.
And actually, part of the intentionality about selecting who's on the panel is related to that too. We interview people, we talk about what our criteria are, and the criteria, I should say, is not about excellent or the best. It's really about the diversity of musical approaches. We try not to even use genres and things like that. It's just musical approach. It's also about is this going to be a meaningful opportunity for them? Do they already have a lot of albums on label, and this could easily be transferred to maybe a different place where we would help them facilitate that? Is this something that's really going to be pivotal? Because of course, for a composer, a creator, having an article, an asset of your work is extremely important. So.
Yeah.
Okay, and more just in terms of actions, and we'll talk a little bit about outcomes following this. I do want to spend a little more time talking about composing inclusion. I had mentioned it in my remarks earlier today, and unfortunately Jessica Mays couldn't be here to speak to it also in the previous panel. So I just wanted to offer what I think is really important about this, and I think it really relates to the conversation we just heard, is this is intentionally creating space to empower young people. This is not only about the commission and the ability for some of these composers to have this opportunity to have their works performed. What we were looking for first and foremost were people who were really excited to work with young people, and that they are going to have these workshops over the course of the year to spend time working with them. We were really excited to hear from interviews, so we did applications, review, interviews, and then made final selections. We were looking for people that were really enthusiastic about that had ideas just about listening to what they were thinking, what they wanted to express, how they wanted to express it, what could we do musically together. So it is really a co-creation with the professional or seasoned musicians coming in only later on and making it a really intergenerational experience. So I'm really excited. We're just launching that this year. And then, of course, you've heard a lot about our wonderful residency led by PaviElle French, so I don't know that I need to say more. I think it's already been said better than I could give it justice, but really, really just so proud that we could be a part of that.
Yeah, one thing that I will say about PaviElle is that she really is on the ground and engaged with community. My partner and I, we moved here to Minnesota in 2018, and it wasn't too long after that before PaviElle was, sitting at our dining room table and engaging us on that level, not to, dismantle racism or even collaborate artistically, but to just connect as human beings. And I think it's very important for arts organizations to platform those individuals, because PaviElle is always going to bring people with her, which means our audiences look different. The perspectives that we have when it comes to artistic conversations is very different. I'm not ashamed to say that the first time I visited the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra for a long time was to see PaviElle's performance there, her premiere there. So we have to think about the residual impact of really connecting ourselves with institutions and individuals who are fully rooted in community and really dedicated to empowering community. And PaviElle is most certainly a shining example of that, and we hope to continue in that trajectory. PaviElle has set the bar very high, certainly.
She really has. Yes, and she continues to inspire us every day. These are some of the composers that were selected for. These are all the composers that were selected for the first Composing Inclusion, and more is, of course, on our website. These are some of the artists that have been selected through some of our other funding programs, the ACF Create through the Jerome Foundation, the McKnight Artist Fellowships that we're privileged to be part of here, and then we also have the Minnesota Music Creator Awards, also funded by the Jerome Foundation.
And I'll just quickly highlight. So at the bottom center of this screen, the duo there in black and white, they're known as the Muatas, a local group. And, the way that they engage activism and community really caught my attention a while ago. I bring that up to say, with every one of these images is a story. With every one of these images is our goals and visions. And with every one of these images is community. So again, the arts can build those bridges. It's up to institutions like ours to determine who these community-based artists are and how we can have a positive impact on them, so that moreover, they can have a positive impact on their respective communities.
I also want to mention, because I think this is important in terms of this conversation, as we think about the selection process, that we could, and we're going to look at some numbers because data is still really helpful and being really honest about where we're at. I think it's important to note that we could easily manufacture certain opportunities. Of course, with Composing Inclusion, there is a certain demographic that it is targeted to, and that's based on the funder. I think, though, what we're really after is how we are making sure that there is a diversity and an equitable experience in the decision-making process, so that the outcome is simply the best people get the award. And because we have really centered the artists and the very many different musical approaches that we believe are all important, that we see really a variety of people resulting in happily some of these funding awards.
It's great to live in such a rich artistic ecosystem here in Minnesota.
We talk a lot about advocacy as well. This is something we've really been intentional about, even elevating more so in these last few years. I Care If You Listen, we acquired a couple years ago. This past year, we've published 136 articles by 42 contributors, 54% of whom identify as BIPOC. We also do a weekly playlist called Listen Up, and 70% of those were curated by BIPOC artists. Everybody was paid for their contributions, which we're really happy we can do. And you wanted to mention?
Yeah, if anyone here for any reason is not familiar with I Care If You Listen, they're really an incredible digital publication that's systematized a renewed approach to storytelling. So, for example, when it comes to giving interviews, who the interviewer is as important as who is being featured, and that's something that is not so common in that sort of journalist aligned world. So it's really great that we've had the opportunity to align our efforts with I Care If You Listen. I'll also mention that ACF's partnership with AACM in Chicago and the Great Black Music Ensemble, it really helps us normalize, again, that diversity of thought when it comes to even the performance experience. It's not all about let's sit down, read this bit of music that's been written down, the audience claps when they're allowed. We want to expand what we're able to impact beyond that, and the Great Black Music Ensemble partnership was an excellent means of beginning and continuing that conversation.
Absolutely, and of course, I also learned a lot from that partnership. I also want to shout out this wonderful panel we were not able to do. Steve Miles is here, that we had planned to do as part of the Social Theory, Politics, and the Arts Conference. So maybe there'll be another opportunity for us to do that. And of course, advocacy, as we think about policy change, is always important too. What are we doing locally with your state, with your county, and of course with the national government to really affect policy change that better supports our artists? Just a fun graphic from one of our panels. We try to look for every opportunity to really lift up these conversations and bring forward not only the value of working with living composers, but how this conversation should be reflected in multiple different settings. This is particularly one for a very large band conference, if you don't know it, each year in Chicago. And What About the Composer was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title, but it ended up being a really powerful conversation. These are some examples of our I Care If You Listen articles. As you see, we have playlists, we have essays, we have interviews. We also have different series related to different topics as it relates to equity. We did one on cultural appropriation in the past. Casting Light, one example here, was really looking at some of the inequities that are less visible to us. In this case, learning to listen from deaf communities. And again, as Garrett said to us, it's just as important that the artists, of course, that we're amplifying represent a wide diversity of approaches and backgrounds, and also the people who are contributing, who are interviewing them, who are writing these articles reflect that as well.
I'll highlight the article, the headline you see there, Classical Music's Data-Driven Race Reckoning. This was a really great article that I was extremely proud to be a part of because it paints a picture, as you can see there in the image, of a non-emotional way of looking just at the facts. I was featured in this article through my work with the Black Opera Alliance, but there are many examples there for you to check out if you like on the I Care If You Listen website about how these conversations tie in with data-driven work and really taking the data, taking it seriously and understanding what can be done with those understandings. For ACF, for facilitating the importance of data-driven work specifically is realized through partnerships like the ones that we have garnered with I Care If You Listen.
I'm just going to move through this quickly. Obviously, again, this is all throughout every layer of the organization, not only what you're seeing externally, but what we're doing internally. It's very important that the Equity Committee continues to guide this work, monitor this work, make sure that we are bringing in the different perspectives and the different experiences as we make these decisions. The board obviously is extremely active, the full board, as well as staff. Some other things just to note is we've also transferred our investments. Last year, we did a huge review with our investment manager, and also more recently, we've transferred our funds to the Woodlands National Bank, if you don't know it, here in the area, owned by the Millock Band of the Ojibwe. We've also created more capacity on the staff to pursue the implementation of these goals, and we're very happy that David Hamilton is now our managing director. Just a few data points, and we're getting a little short on time here. Again, this will be available to you later. We do look at numbers, and we are looking at different ways to capture the numbers because it does help us understand some of our progress in addition to the testimonials, and obviously the most important, which is artists telling us they feel they belong here and that ACF is a space for them. So we do look at who is applying, how do they identify. It is still optional to identify, but very importantly, they self-identify. And we did not see the kind of increase we'd hoped for this past year. We want to be really transparent about that, and we want to understand why. And of course, the different programs are attracting different numbers and different applicants.
Yep. Yeah, we can move on for the sake of time, yeah.
Our staff, we have some great, fantastic new staff. I'm very excited about that. We have 2 open positions if anybody wants to come work with us. You don't actually have to live in Minnesota for those. Check our website. We were really excited to see how many people applied to the last 2 job openings, and the majority named this equity work that we're doing, acknowledging we are in transition. We are not experts, but wanting to be a part of that as why they wanted to work here. And that's really exciting for us. Our board is currently 52% identify as BIPOC. And again, for us, as we cultivate donors, partners, and people who want to be part of the community, naming this as a shared commitment and shared priority is part of the conversation.
And a strategic approach, even to hiring, of course, has a great impact on the work that we're able to do, not only as a board, but specifically as an equity committee. So a special shout out to David, Director of Operations, for helping me facilitate the work of the equity committee moving forward as staff support. So it all connects. Everything is connected there.
And we just want to be, again, transparent and just offer some of the things we're learning as we go. This is now, I mentioned, our 2nd year in this, and I think what we've found is some of those initial things that we changed, like removing fees, inviting people, changing language, maybe not easy, but those are kind of obvious ways that we can remove barriers to access. It's the culture change, it's the systemic change, obviously, that is going to take longer, and not only longer, but it requires some perseverance. Sorry, I just stole your word. Perseverance, I got that word from him. And also, it's not going to be a straight line. We're going to make 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And the important thing is that we continue to learn and do better.
And then to wrap us up here, with some of my truths, I'll just read them. Systems change and equitable impact across artistic ecosystems is a long-term process. Streamlining our committee goals will help us measure progress in the short term. So we had a very huge list of goals that we wanted to engage as a community. We have condensed those down into 4 specific goals, and that's how we're going to move forward, at least in this next year, so that we make sure that we're looking at the long term and the short term. Acknowledging the long-term nature of our work cannot affect our sense of urgency. Systems change requires a critical look at processes as they appear both broadly and in the day-to-day. So again, this comes from who we select on panels, what equitable hiring processes look like, all the way to building cohorts and understanding what the impact what impact that can have on the broader community. And then finally, positive change begins with dialogue. Dialogue has been and will continue to be the foundation of the Equity Committee's work. It's very untraditional to go, at least from my perspective, to go into an official committee meeting of a board just speaking just freely and generatively. But that's really how we got where we are now as a committee, and we're looking forward to continuing that work in that way moving forward. I did want to tie a bow on this presentation with a quote. I practice Nichiren Buddhism, and the president of the organization that we belong to, his name is Daisaku Ikeda, and he says, dialogue is not some simplistic assertion of one's own position, nor is it necessarily about persuading others to one's point of view. Dialogue is about demonstrating respect for another's life and being determined to learn when confronted with differences in personality and perspective. Since PaviElle walked back in the room, I'll take a little bit of what she was saying a little earlier. You know, we have to think about the needs of people, and once those needs are met, everything else has an opportunity to bloom. So through dialogue, it's not only about us affirming other people's artistry, but other people's right to artistry, and how we can facilitate that not only as human beings, but as an organization built to engage these conversations through the lens of equity. And I think that does it for our report card, at least for this year.
All right. Good work. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for joining us.